Do you like the Calamity mod? Do you wish for a fresh new experience with it? Well, do I have the thing for you. Introducing the Infernum mod, a mod that adds a brand new difficulty to Calamity which gives all the bosses crazy new attacks. And in this video, I decided to play through the game. Enjoy! So I started off by doing a little deforestation and building a nice little house. After that I went underground to go mining, made some better gear and went exploring the world to find more materials. I went ahead and crafted the Wolfram controller, then went to the jungle and got enough items to craft the Wolfram armor set and the snap thorn. I also made the Sun Spirit staff, which was a decent weapon. I spent some more time exploring underground and later, while I was looking at some crafting recipes, this happened. I had to build an arena and I had to do it fast. At first, for just a little moment, I thought I was doing pretty well at the fight, but no, I died horribly. Then went ahead and made my arena a lot bigger and just in time too. Eye of Cthulhu was back for a rematch. I actually did a lot better this time, getting it to almost half health, but ended up dying once again. So I then decided to try my luck on the Desert Scourge. After crafting some buff potions, I headed over to the desert, set up the arena and I was ready to start the fight. The first attempt actually went pretty well. The boss would spam a lot of projectiles, especially these really annoying ones that spawn from the sides of the screen, and it was really hard to dodge them since I did not have a lot of mobility. I used the grappling hook to get a faster vertical boost to dodge a lot of the attacks, but this was obviously not enough and I needed more. So I decided to craft the sandstorm in a bottle. I also made the arena taller and this helped a lot. After a couple of close calls and failed attempts, I finally beat my first boss. Immediately after this, I decided to fight the Eye of Cthulhu again. This time I built a sky bridge instead of using the small arena. This definitely helped and I actually managed to make it really far into the field. I also made some summoning potions and some better accessories and tried again. I also used the gravitation potion to give me more mobility so I could dodge attacks better. And it actually worked. The gravitation potion was a huge help and after a few more attempts I beat the Eye of Cthulhu. With the eye down, I had the Death Stare Rod, which was an incredible summoning weapon, even though the one I got had probably the worst stats possible. So then I thought, hey, if I could beat the Eye of Cthulhu, then surely I could beat King Slime. You know, the literal first boss of Terraria. Yeah. At a certain point, the King Slime had an attack where a red gem stays directly above my head and shoots lasers at me. It also had pretty much the same amount of health as the actual boss, so trying to destroy it was a waste. And King Slime still felt too fast for me. I could barely dodge its jump attacks, and with the lasers shooting ahead of me, it was kind of annoying. At one point, it even did a fighting game-ass combo on me and stun-locked the hell out of me. Incredible. So I decided to leave it for now and come back when I had better gear. So instead, I decided to go and fight Crabylon. I went down to the glowing mushroom biome and spent a while clearing out a large enough area to build an arena for the boss. And the first attempt went pretty well. Crabylon would jump around like usual, while sometimes spawning spore clouds that linger around and damage you if you touch them. It would also spawn a little minion spores that would slowly hover towards me. Dying, it was clear that my arena had to be a little bigger, so I did expand it. Overall, this fight felt a lot easier than the others and I managed to beat it pretty quick. With Crabylon down, I crafted myself a new whip and went ahead to fight the Brain of Cthulhu. Now, I was a bit worried about this fight considering how cramped up the Crimson Biome cavern is. Once again, the fight went pretty well for my first try. For some reason, the boss seemed to spawn with 25% of its health missing and I wasn't sure if that was a bug or not. But hey, I'll take it. The brain had projectiles that would inflict ichor on me, which was something I definitely had to avoid. After a few attempts, it was clear that I had to expand the arena. Using some bombs, I blew off some of the walls and rebuilt it. I was a bit worried about blowing up too much and having the game no longer register it as a Crimson Biome, but it seemed fine. After half of its health gone, it started doing a series of different attacks, all launching ichor projectiles. One of them even launching homing ones. When it was close to dying, its attacks started getting a little scary. It casted the usual mirages and all of them dashed towards me at once, but it also used a brain laser attack which looked really cool. It was quite easy to dodge, but if I did get hit, it did a lot of damage. Eventually, I got everything down and finally beat the Brain of Cthulhu. With the brain down, I can now make myself the Deathbringer pickaxe, which meant that I could now mine Hellstone. So I built a elevator, went down to the underworld, got myself some Hellstone, and made some upgrades. Molten Tools, the Imp Staff, and the Cinder Blossom Staff. I also made some obsidian armor. Things were looking good. I had some nice gear now, and I was ready to fight the next boss, the Perforators. But first, I decided to fight the King Slime again. This time, it went really well. I was doing a lot of damage with my new gear. When the boss reached around 15% health, the ninja inside it jumped out, started doing flips and throwing shurikens, which was pretty cool. I defeated it very easily this time and moved on to go fight the Perforators. I first built a big line of platforms above the Crimson biome and then started the fight. Now, this fight was definitely the hardest one by far. The first phase was fairly easy. The hive would shoot projectiles that were quite easy to dodge, but after a while it would spawn the first Perforator worm, and this was where the fight started to get hard. The attacks it does really caught me off guard. The worm would do worm things, but what made the fight tricky was that the hive would now constantly dash towards me, dealing a lot of contact damage. This phase was over when I defeated the worm, but then the hive would do this crazy attack. Shortly after, it would spawn the second worm. This one was much more aggressive than the first one and had better tracking. During this phase, the hive would generally remain away from the player while shooting various projectiles that were quite tricky to dodge. It would occasionally do a short dash that caught me off guard every single time. After dying in this phase, it was clear that I had to expand the arena. It took me a few attempts, but I finally managed to kill the second worm, which followed with another short phase of the hive shooting lots of projectiles. Finally, the third worm had spawned, and this was by far the hardest one. It was much more aggressive than the other two worms, and the hive would now dash right down on me. I spent a long time on this fight, but I eventually reached the final phase, which was quite terrifying. The whole sky turned red and the hive became super aggressive, doing a whole barrage of attacks. I was terrified that I was going to lose the fight here, but I somehow clutched it and I finally beat the boss. After this, I went underground to mine some aerialite and went around gathering materials to make aerialite gear. Up next was Queen Bee, so I headed down to the jungle to make an arena. This fight was fairly simple. It still did the dashes it normally does, but now it had a lot more projectiles. It also sometimes summons a barrage of giant bees that fly towards you from the sides, but this was also pretty easy to dodge. I managed to beat it in only 2 attempts. After that, it was time to fight Skeletron. Now, this fight was incredibly difficult. I was expecting the funny big skeleton to not be that bad, but Skeletron ended up being the hardest boss I fought even up till near the end of the game. Yeah, it was that hard. I made an arena directly above the dungeon and started the fight. The fight seemed pretty simple at first. Skeletron would shoot its skulls towards me and then do the rolling chase attack. Both very easy to dodge, but the attack it started doing next really caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how I could dodge these attacks, but the one it did after that was even worse. I legitimately had no idea how to dodge this. It almost felt impossible. After a lot of failed attempts and painful deaths, I eventually got myself the Aestheticus so that I could attack the boss from a further range. And even after more failed attempts, I eventually switched back to the obsidian armor and the snapthorn. And this time, I was definitely dealing more damage. Finally, 3 hours of suffering and almost 80 attempts later, I had finally beaten the boss. And after all that, instead of taking a break like a normal person, I continued down into the dungeon. Really, what I wanted to get was a shadow key and a bewitching table. I got what I needed and went back to my base. I then decided to go take a little swim in the abyss. I went around opening various shadow chests in order to find the herring staff. The next boss was a slime guard. This fight was quite strange. It wasn't that bad, only took me around 7 attempts to finish. It had lots of projectile attacks, most of them really easy to dodge, but I'm pretty sure the boss fight was bugged because during my successful attempt, the slimes got stuck in the same position for a while, and this happened several times. But hey, I'm not complaining. I'll take what I get. Once I beat both the slimes, the core started chasing me around, shooting projectiles aggressively, and this was probably the hardest attack to dodge. After beating the boss, I crafted the strategical armor and the slime puppet staff. Now this was a really good weapon. Thinking about it now, I had a mod on that made it so that summoning weapons did not use any mana, and this was probably the reason why the weapon was as good as it was. I actually ended up using this weapon as support for a long time. Up next was the wall of flesh, and before I could start the fight, I had to of course build an arena. This took a long time to make. I had to mine out a huge chunk of the layer of ash on the top and all the buildings in my way. The fight itself was not that bad. The wall of flesh had 4 eyes that shoot lasers at you, and if you kill any of the eyes, they would then proceed to hover around you, occasionally shooting lasers. Once they start hovering around, they always shoot lasers in a cross pattern, which was confusing to dodge at first, but I got used used to it after a few attempts. The boss would also shoot a giant laser that deals a lot of damage, and I ended up using featherfall potions to help dodge this attack. After 12 attempts, I managed to beat it, and with that it was time for hard mode. The very first thing I did was go to Spider Cave to get the materials to make spider armor. After that, I headed over to the Ice Caverns to get the ancient ice junk. Now this weapon is really strong, but it has one huge flaw. The minions it summons are dumb as rocks. It literally attacks everything on the screen except for the enemies that are right next to you. But it is a really good weapon regardless, especially against bosses. Still, I had to get better weapons, and the two best choices at this point were the Blade Staff and the Sanguine Staff. I decided to get the Sanguine Staff because, well, it looks cooler. To get this, I had to go fishing during a blood moon and fight the Dread Nautilus mini-boss. But there was one problem. I forgot about the number of mobs that spawned during a blood moon in Calamity. It was impossible to fish. After several tries and building weird little fishing huts, I managed to catch a Dread Nautilus, and they changed its AI. The mod actually changed the AI of the Dread Nautilus, because of course it did. And as expected, I died real quick, so I kinda gave up on it for now. Instead, I decided to get the Blade Staff first, which meant that I had to fight the Queen Slime. This fight was actually quite similar to the Slime God. It sometimes does an attack where a bunch of projectiles spawn around you before they all launch towards you. While fighting, I fell off the arena I built, and while I thought I was about to die, I was stuck in a spot that basically made me dodge all the projectiles it was shooting, and I managed to kill it. Unfortunately, I didn't get the Blade Staff that time, so I had to fight it a couple more times to actually get it. Now, I wanted to try getting the Sanguine Staff again, so I was chilling, waiting for it to become night, and then this happened. The asshole Skeletron Prime decided to ruin my night. Now, Skeletron Prime's head was invincible during the first phase of the fight, and I had to destroy all 4 arms before I could damage the head. The arms also seemed to enrage when only one was remaining. This phase was pretty simple, but during the second phase, the boss got a lot more aggressive, shooting more projectiles and doing various dashes. It also had this super cool laser attack. I of course died during this fight and went to go try fighting the Dread Nautilus again. But before that, I had to somehow reduce the spawn rate of enemies. Now, I had the Louis AFK mod, which meant that I could craft the ultimate peaceful buff, and it actually worked. With the buff on, barely any enemies would spawn, and it made fishing a lot easier. Now, as for the Dread Nautilus fight, its attacks were kinda tricky to dodge. Overall, it wasn't so bad, but one attack really caught me off guard. It would summon the Sanguine Bats, and these moved really fast. It almost felt impossible to dodge. After a few more failed attempts, I eventually gave up and instead decided to fight the Aquatic Scourge. There wasn't anything special about this boss. In fact, it kinda felt easier than its regular version. I went to the Sulphurous Sea, spawned it, and managed to kill it on my second attempt. After that, I did the Acid Rain event to get some more upgrades, and then decided to fight Cryogen instead, as it drops a summon weapon as well. This fight was pretty fun. It would spawn ice pillars to block you off and shoot various projectiles. These projectiles are pretty easy to dodge, and of course, that means that I would mess it up anyways. It would also do various dashing attacks when its health was lowered. On my first attempt, I managed to get its health pretty low. In fact, I got it down to around 20% every single attempt. After a couple more failed attempts, I finally killed it on my 13th try. And I didn't get the weapon I wanted. Puff. I tried a couple more times, but I never managed to get it, and convinced myself that it just doesn't exist, even though it literally shows up on the loot list. So I instead decided to fight Skeletron Prime again. But first, I headed over to the jungle to find some life fruits and max out my health. After a couple of attempts, I finally managed to kill it and got myself the mounted scanner. Now this weapon was really good. Its only downside was that it was a Draydon weapon, which meant that I had to charge it frequently. Otherwise, it did loads of damage and actually had good tracking, unlike a certain other weapon that I've been using. So after that, I fought the twins, and I was genuinely shocked by how fast the twins died. This weapon was actually insane. The fight itself seemed super fun. They would spin around me shooting their projectiles. I managed to kill Retinazer first, which meant I had to fight the Enraged Spasmatism. This section was really cool. It mostly did dashes, and the cursed flame attacks had a really cool effect to it. With how good the mounted scanner was, I decided to try the Dread Nautilus one more time. And what do you know? This time I killed it and finally got the Sanguine Staff. After that, I went mining for a bunch of ores and made the Daedalus armor, and then went to go fight the Destroyer. As expected, the mounted scanner absolutely shredded through the Destroyer. It felt a lot faster now and had various rocket attacks, and one of its attacks was very similar to the laser attack the Devourer of Gods does. I killed it first try and then got ready for the next boss, which was the Brimstone Elemental. So I headed to the edge of the underworld and prepared my arena. Now this fight was interesting. A lot of its attacks were really erratic and random, and I didn't really know how to dodge a lot of them at first. The boss also set a sort of boundary around it during some attacks that I had to be in during the fight, so it made dodging a little tricky. Overall, it wasn't too bad, and I managed to beat it in around 6 tries. Well, just barely. Immediately after that, I fought Calamitus. Now this fight was super fun. This was definitely my favorite boss fight yet. The fight started off really simple, with the boss always sticking to my side and shooting projectiles at me. After a while, the boss would spawn in its 2 other clones. During this phase, I had to fight the 2 clones at the same time. One of them would dash towards me and the other always shoots projectiles, and they would alternate between each other with different attack patterns. After this phase was over, the next one was basically a beefed up version of the starting phase. The boss wasn't too hard. It took me around 11 tries to beat it, but it was a super fun fight regardless. After that was Terra, and I knew I would have to build a big arena for this, so I spent a while digging around in an area in the underground jungle and setting up the platforms for the arena. This fight was kinda tricky at first. The first phase was very easy and I thought I was about to beat it first try, but the second phase caught me off guard. It left spore clouds all over the arena, making dodging really tricky. It also did this attack that really confused me at first, and later on would split the arena into 4 sections and chase me around super aggressively. During my second run, I thought I beat the boss, but it despawned for some reason. After a couple of attempts, I managed to no-hit the first half, which was also the first time in this run that my adrenaline bar was filled, and activating adrenaline shredded through Planter's health so fast that I didn't even see the attack where it splits the arena. After that, I got the Tiki armor and headed over to the dungeon to farm some ectoplasm. Then it was time to fight Astrum Aureus. But there was one problem. My world didn't have an astral biome. I leapt the world twice to make sure I didn't miss anything, but it just didn't exist. So I looked it up, and apparently the astral meteor doesn't actually land if your world has a sky bridge. A sky bridge, huh? Well, let's see. Oh. Luckily, the steampunker actually sold Astral Solution, so using the Contaminator, I created an Astral Biome next to the dungeon. I also did the Pumpkin Moon in the hopes of getting the Necromantic Scroll, but I couldn't get it to drop. I did get the Dark Harvest Whip, however, which was a really good weapon. After that, I built the arena in the Astral Biome and spawned in Astrum Aureus. This fight was also a bit tricky at the start. The laser barrage attack it does at first seemed impossible to dodge. After a few close calls and failed attempts, I decided to expand the arena downwards because I thought the boss was getting enraged. I dug out a huge chunk of land directly below the arena while also doing the Pumpkin Moon whenever it turned night. By the time I was done, I had enough spooky wood to make the full armor set, and I was set to try Astrum Aureus again. This time I found out something. I had no idea this was even a thing until this point. With the shield I had, I could dash through attacks without taking any damage. With this, it was so much easier to dodge the barrage attack it does. And finally, after 17 attempts, I finally managed to beat the boss. And the meteor landed right on the dungeon. Incredible. I was worried that this would mess up the cultist spawns, but I figured that I would just find some other way if it does happen. I got the Borealis Bomber from the boss, which was basically an upgrade to the slime puppet staff I was already using. After that, I went to the Underground Hollow to try to farm the Rod of Discord. I gave up after a while and just bought it from the wizard. God bless mods. And now it was time to fight the golem. I went down to find the temple, cut through all the traps in there, and made it to the boss room. I built a couple of platforms in the area to help me out in the fight, and when the boss spawned, it broke all the platforms. Asshole. I have to say I was very shocked by this fight. Golem in vanilla Terraria is a joke of a boss. His attacks are super easy to dodge considering how late into the game this is, but Infernum Golem, however, felt like a boss fight straight from Hollow Knight. It would summon spears to prevent me from staying on the ground and summon its own moving platforms. That's right, the bastard broke all my platforms just to use its own. Thanks a lot. It also had some crazy laser attacks which were kinda similar to Skeleton Prime, and this weird spear attack that I had no idea how to dodge. Overall, pretty fun fight. Only took me around 5 attempts, so not that hard. After the fight, I went back for a little swim in the abyss once again, this time to get some scoria ore to craft the resurrection butterfly weapon. After that, it was time to fight Anahita and the Leviathan. I went over to the ocean and built a little too much arena. And now I was ready. The fight started off like usual with me only fighting Anahita until I got her health down to 50%. After that, Leviathan jumps out of the water like the majestic creature he is, and after a while they did an attack where it seemed like Anahita was riding Leviathan while attacking me. When this phase was over, it was back to fighting Anahita solo, but this time she was a lot more aggressive. I actually beat them first try. Still, it was a pretty fun fight. I did have to fight them a few more times to get the community item. Next up was the Empress of Light, and I was a little worried about the fight considering what the Empress is like. But then I realized that pretty much every boss that I fought so far has been like vanilla Empress. The fight itself was very cool as I expected. It even used the Terra Prisma in some of its attacks. This attack looked super cool, and it also killed some of my NPCs. I managed to finish the fight in under a minute and got myself the Terra Prisma and the Kaleidoscope. Up next was the Plaguebringer Goliath. I used the Plantera arena from earlier for this fight. The fight was basically just a more aggressive Queen Bee with added laser attacks. I finished the fight on my first try, but just barely. I feel like Rage mode saved me from getting a nuke in my face. After this, I crafted the Plaguebringer armor set and got ready to fight Duke Fishron. I went to the glowing mushroom biome to get a couple of truffle worms at first, then headed over to the ocean to do a little fishing. Oh, wait, that's just Duke Fishron. I honestly expected this fight to be a lot harder than it turned out to be, but I managed to beat it first try. The visuals were pretty cool, however. It used various weapon attacks like the Razorblade Typhoon and the Tempest Staff projectiles. Up next was a Lunatic Cultist. I was planning to use the arena I set up in the Sulphurous Sea for this, but when I spawned the boss in, there were invisible walls preventing me from going too far away, so I had to fight it with no way to reset my wing time. The fight itself wasn't too special, but it was definitely a lot more fun than vanilla. I did manage to kill the boss, however, it had a desperation phase where it would spam some really hard to dodge attacks right before it died, and that was what killed me. So I tried again, and once again died to the same attack. On the third try, however, I managed to survive it and finally beat the boss. Immediately after this, I went to go to the Stardust Pillar. Now, I'm not sure what exactly happened here, but I barely got any fragments from this. It sucked cause that was the one that I needed the most. I did the solar pillar just to check if that was intentional, and I did get a lot more fragments from here. My best guess is using Ultimate Battler bugged out some drops. Now, if I wanted to get more Stardust fragments, I would have to get the other ones as well, but if I did all the pillars, it would spawn in Moonlord. So my best bet was to fight Astrum Deus, which would drop all 4 fragments. I used the same arena I built in the Astral biome for this one. Now, this fight was super cool, although it did slow down my game a bit. The fight starts off with a bunch of small comets raining from above before the actual boss comes flying in. There were a lot of cool attacks during the whole fight, but my favorite one is definitely the 2 attacks it does at low health. Check it out for yourself and tell me that isn't one of the coolest things you've ever seen. This was such a fun boss fight and definitely up there with one of my favorites. After that was done, I got ready to fight Moonlord and did the other 2 pillars. Now, I had zero hope that I was going to be able to first try this boss, and I was quite surprised by what I got. Moonlord traps you in a square area similar to what Supreme Calamitas does. Its attacks had so many different projectiles with different properties, some of them super hard to dodge, but the real hard part was once you get to 50% health and it releases 3 of its eyes. Each of the eyes had a different type of attack. One would dash towards you while launching a bunch of projectiles, the other shoots lasers, and the other one just straight up spawns more eyes. Keeping up with all these different projectiles was super hectic. The coolest attack, however, was when it was just about to die and it summons a black hole and starts launching a barrage of projectiles. And finally, on my 20th attempt, I did it. Moonlord died with a fancy explosion, and with that, I had finally beaten the game. Roll credits. Oh wait, this is the Calamity mod. Right. But unfortunately, that is gonna have to be the end of the video, because well, I haven't beaten the game yet. I managed to make it to Yaron and lost my save file. Yeah. I keep forgetting to back up my character every single time. But if you guys want to see a part 2 of me doing all the post Moonlord bosses, which were even crazier than all the bosses we fought so far, then write a comment down below. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out when we upload the video. That's all. I hope you enjoyed the video.